joining out there, so we appreciate you coming out tonight. Tonight we've got something a little bit different. So we usually like to host everyone in person, but unfortunately Jamie is stuck in quarantine, not quarantine, what is it called? Lockdown. Same thing, in Sydney. But we're really grateful to have him virtually here. Hello. So just before we officially introduce him, I'll just introduce myself. So my name's Sinead, and I work building startups in New Zealand for a company called Talent Army. So focusing on the recruitment space, and Rosie here, as well as being the co-director, she has a marketplace called Our Closet, which is rental and resale of personal goods. Oh, we're having technical issues. I'm just going to keep talking. So for those of you who haven't been to a Startup Grind event before, so Startup Grind was actually founded by Google, and I think we're in over 600 countries. Sorry, I'm just talking over you. So we typically host monthly events with different founders, entrepreneurs, investors, just talking through their story and the successes that they've had, also the challenges and failures. So before I pass it on to Rosie, I'll just give you a quick rundown on the bathroom. So they're through here, either just go through the store or around the back, and then if there is a fire alarm, we just have to all congregate on that road straight outside. So yeah, Rosie.
Okay, brilliant. Okay. So we can get into our fireside chat. So for anyone who it's your first time joining us, how this works is it's around 30 to 45 minutes up here, and then at the end we have about a 15-minute Q&A. So if you do have any questions, keep them in mind for that. So just before we get into things, can I have a show of hands of who here has their own startup? Okay, we've got a few. Is there anyone that doesn't have a startup yet, but may want one, may have an idea? Okay, fantastic. Do we have any investors here tonight? Oh, we do. Brilliant. And anyone here just for the free pizza and beer? Everyone, yay! Okay, fantastic. So for a bit of context for tonight's guest, to give you a bit of a background, Crimson Education is the world's leading US and UK university admissions consulting company. They take college admissions consulting to a new level of personalization and success, increasing students' chances of administration to the Ivy League, Oxford, and other top universities by up to 700%, which is pretty amazing. So while in his final year of high school, Jamie co-founded Crimson Education to level the global playing field of university admissions for other young Kiwis from Auckland in 2013. By reaching out to friends and teachers with just $40 in a bank account, he and co-founder Chandra hosted packed-out seminars and secured their first students and tutors. Just a year later, Crimson gained its first $1 million in funding, from which it began to grow its edtech footprint steadily. As funding scaled to US $30 million in 2016, with a team of 25, Jamie continued to invest heavily in growing Crimson's tech hub. Fast forward to today, with a team of 450 based across 24 locations around the world, the Crimson Education Group is valued at $450 million US. That's pretty amazing, and includes early learning tutoring houses, a fully registered online high school, and a university admission support and career mentoring platform. So on that note, let's give Jamie a big round of applause. Okay, so now I'd like to dive into Jamie's journey. So what we like to do at Startup Grind is take it all the way back to your childhood and upbringing. So my first question, Jamie, is where are you from and what were your interests growing up?
Yeah, sure. So growing up, I was in Glendale in Auckland, and some of my main interests growing up was obviously learning education. In my family, education was kind of in our blood. Growing up, I think I have this funny memory of being in Pakuranga when I was 4, and I went to a tuition academy with 200 Chinese students myself. pretty early on. Early on in my journey, I focused a lot on math and English at school, and then picked up kind of other extracurriculars along the way. For fun, I did video games, competitive sports like tennis and hockey. But for me, kind of academics was always my big focus going through school, and it was a big kind of family focus as well for my mum. So that was kind of where it came from.
Fantastic. Did you always aspire to build something like Crimson?
No, not at all actually. I had no idea kind of what entrepreneurship was. Going through school when I was like 14 or so, my goal was to stay within New Zealand, probably go to Auckland, try to do medicine, something like this. And then it wasn't until I was about 16 or 17 where I picked up economics as a subject in high school, and really found this kind of awesome way to apply math, finance, and business together. So from there, I kind of had shifted my focus to applying for these global universities, and Harvard was kind of my goal school to get into. And after getting into that, I began focusing on trying to build a career on Wall Street. So I actually started Crimson. I was really sort of drawn into it by a lot of students and parents reaching out to me after I'd gotten into kind of all the universities that I had applied for after high school to sort of get my advice on their own academic journey. So I would say I kind of fell into it as opposed to kind of systematically trying to find a startup idea.
Okay, well that answers my next question as well. Okay, how did you meet Chandra, your co-founder?
Yeah, sure. So it was very organic. So when I was going through high school, one of my favorite activities was, to show you that I was a little bit nerdy, it was this thing called Model United Nations. So Model UN basically is this activity where you represent a country and then you debate different like global issues through the lens of the country that you represent. So I met Chandra at a conference, Auckland Model UN, and she was sort of one of the best Model UNers in Auckland at the time. And then as we went through high school, she was the head girl of Albany Senior High School. And I remember seeing her big campaign, which was all over Facebook. And I was really impressed by her creativity to sort of get this big public support behind her initiative. Then we were selected for the same Model UN team to go to Europe after high school called Fireside. And so we spent a month together, and during that trip we spoke a lot about high school and some of the experiences we had. And that was kind of where some of the early idea for Crimson came from. So I sort of met her through Model UN, and then it was following that Fireside trip that we decided to launch Crimson together.
So you kind of touched on this before, but can you tell us how you got those first few friends and teachers on board and what convinced them that Crimson was worth being a part of?
Yes, totally. So going through high school, I did lots of extracurriculars because one of the main things you need to do to build your profile for these top US schools is extracurriculars and stuff, and I really enjoyed a lot of them. So I met a lot of talented debating students, people that did things like Math Olympiad, and other extracurriculars, and then I met the 3 other kids that got into Harvard from Auckland, from New Zealand that year, and so I recruited them plus a lot of these different tutors. I then went to my old tutors that taught me in high school, like my old English teacher, math teacher, etc., and recruited them as well. And that became my initial pool of students, of tutors that I would work with. And then once I got to Harvard, I began recruiting like my roommates, my classmates, folks I met like in the dining hall and stuff, to be tutors for Crimson and teach online back to kids in New Zealand. So that was some of the early, I guess tutors joining us. Why a lot of them would have joined us is because, a lot of them knew me personally through high school and knew that I loved academics and, was really keen to help some students. And I think it became a bit of a snowball because a lot of the sort of most strongest academic students in New Zealand were joining Crimson. And so other tutors sort of saw it as, a pretty cool thing to do. And I think that kind of got the ball rolling in those early days.
Okay, brilliant. So those first few seminars, what were they about, and how did you go about selling them out and getting, so much great feedback with those?
Yeah. So our very first seminar was actually the Crown Plaza in Auckland, and it was back in mid-2013. And basically, we've gotten about 10 different students who recently finished high school and had gotten into various global universities. So we had a student here that was off to Cambridge, a guy called Tom Preble who was studying at Duke, a bunch of other students from King's and other nearby schools. So the value prop to parents was really to hear from students who'd just been on this quite unique journey, had foregone the kind of typical New Zealand university application, and had applied successfully to these US schools. So in doing so, we kind of positioned Crimson as a bit of a community expert on this topic. Then I was able to describe Crimson and how we offered this support to families, and that was kind of the beginning of it. So the first event was about 200 families in the CBD. We chose the location because it was easy to park, and how we filled the event was we got the speakers to share on Facebook, the event description, shared it to teachers in our school, got some parents who enjoyed our tutoring to share it around, So it was all very organic to kind of get the the ball rolling. And then I remember we did this cheeky thing where we had all the students stand by a crimson sign as they walked in, take a photo, and then we they all tagged themselves, so it spread quite virally amongst sort of all the attendees to these pockets of high achieving kids across Auckland. So we had no sort of money for paid Facebook spend, so it was quite the organic pursuit.
Fantastic. So you were studying still while building Crimson as CEO. How did you balance those two, I assume very busy roles?
I've actually almost never stopped studying since I started Crimson, so I guess the most challenging time of balancing studies with Crimson was during my undergrad degree at Harvard for sure, because my applied math program was very rigorous, very challenging, and it took sometimes like 40 to 60 hours a week. So I would say during those early years of Crimson, it was really great support from Chandra and Fangzhou, our other co-founder. So Fangzhou was based in Australia, Chandra in New Zealand. We were all going through university together. Chandra at University of Auckland, Fangzhou at ANU in Canberra, and then me in the States. And so when I had exams on, for example, Chandra and FC would cover, vice versa. We had some good time zone coverage going on. And then we had some really good, early tutors. So for example, one of our team members, Ben Thomas, who was with our team since the very beginning, helped us also in those early days. So we had, a good crew of people helping to kind of balance this. And, we also had some pretty wacky hours. So I used to do my, classes and everything during the day, and then I would mentor Crimson kids at night because, it's pretty late in the EST time zone back to New Zealand. So I remember spending more than 50 hours mentoring this kid, Sunil Singh, who was a boy from Hamilton Boys High School, who got into Harvard with our support. And I must have spent 50 hours between probably 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. On Skype calls with him. And then another guy like Duncan Parsons, similar kind of wacky hours. So it was very much Crimson at night, and then classes during the day.
Wow. When did you find the time to sleep? That sounds like a lot. So you were able to raise $1 million after just a year. Was that your first time going through a race like that?
Yeah, and I had very limited experience with sort of capital raising. So I was an intern for the Ice House, which has now really grown a lot of prominence in Auckland as sort of the major startup incubator in the country. They've got the leading kind of angel investing syndicate, and they invest in a lot of Kiwi startups. So way back in 2013, they were still, they were, I think, doing pretty well, but it was still early days for them. And so I interned for the CEO at the time, or actually still the CEO, Robbie Paul. And sitting in that role, I got to meet some founders that were kind of designing their companies, coming in to raise capital, seeing their pitch decks and stuff. At the time, Crimson in our first year, I think, had more than 300K in sales. And so I saw lots of these founders come along with a pitch deck with an idea, no business yet. And we already had like significant traction, lots of product, lots of students coming in that were really happy. And it sort of, I guess, became apparent that we could potentially grow this a bit faster.
So let's move on to some of the experiences and challenges that you have faced that have brought you to where you are today. How did you find the expansion beyond New Zealand? You are in over 20 other countries now, I believe? Yeah,
so my logic and part of my sort of, I guess, business strategy is around, dominating niche verticals. And so with Crimson, when we first started Crimson, the market is like small in Auckland. How many kids in Auckland want to apply for basically Ivy League schools, MIT, Stanford, etc. We've brought in significantly since then, but that was like 50 kids when I started. So it was very clear to us that early on we had to go global, and also the pain point we were solving was very global. Auckland's a very diverse place. You've got lots of students with Chinese, Korean backgrounds, European backgrounds, different ethnicities. And so we sort of realized that actually the same pain points, the same problems with career guidance in schools, and the same sort of lack of understanding of this process was probably quite an international problem. And so as we raised our B round, we were really focused on a pretty rapid international expansion because we wanted to kind of seize this market opportunity across all the major geographies, that it was relevant. So we went into places like Russia, Thailand, Brazil, Japan, into many geographies you wouldn't normally see a Kiwi company venturing, and built, fully localized teams. And I can go into a lot more detail about this, but it was, quite the learning. But today Crimson is the market leader across most of these geographies, and it's quite critical to our success that we have this full international footprint. So going global, I guess, was a big theme of Crimson. We first went to Australia and the UK and Thailand, and then ventured to many more of these more frontier geographies. and made a lot of mistakes along the way. But after grinding through that, we now in 2021 have fully localized teams which speak the local language, have local distribution partnerships, with personnel in all of these geographies for the most part, who really help Crimson kind of get to market. And that's been very effective because as we launched our online high school, for example, we've been able to recruit kids across more than 25 countries, within only a matter of months of following launch. So that distribution network has now been pretty critical to our competitive advantage on the world stage.
Brilliant. And what have been some of the challenges of expanding internationally? Obviously, it's you're recruiting new team members, and in countries where English may not be your first language. Can you talk us through some of those?
Yeah, sure. So I would say in New Zealand we have quite a, lovely business environment. People are pretty relaxed and chill and happy to help. I would say as you move into some of these foreign geographies, the level of competition becomes a lot more cutthroat and intense. So in China, for example, I took this class at Harvard called Business in China, Entrepreneurship in China. And there's a saying for foreigners in China which translates literally to free lunch. And basically the idea is, when you go into some of these geographies, you might form partnerships with local companies, you might partner with local operations, you might try and do acquisitions, but a lot of the time this is very challenging in these geographies. So for example, we acquired this company in China and there was all kinds of challenges with the team we acquired, running this business outside of the bounds of kind of what we had agreed, a lot of the material we'd been given wasn't correct, things like this. So anyway, as you go into these different foreign geographies, you need to really go into all of these discussions without without naivety. You need to really understand what incentives drive the other party, and kind of, even if you're really careful, you'll still get burnt many times over, as we have done in many different geographies. I would say some of the most challenging ones to expand would be places like China, where you have formidable local entrepreneurs, people that move very quickly, they're willing to work very hard, and the market's quite huge. Other geographies that were sort of quite interesting, places like Russia, where I had no context, but I found a really good country manager called Andrew Beaton. When he was 19, we dropped him in Russia, took a gap year from college, and now Russia's one of our biggest global markets. So we took some punts on some frontier markets as well. Other geographies, I would say, even Australia is quite different to New Zealand, so you might think these two countries are quite similar, but actually the attitudes, for example, towards education are quite different, and the types of schooling dynamics, the size of things like the tutoring industries are very different. And so I think one thing that I really advocate for is to really deeply respect the need to localize. There are very few businesses that can just dump their business in every geography and it works. We had to think about ways to localize sales and marketing, ways to adapt to some of the different cultural needs of students, and other dynamics in the business. But I would say, if you want to build a company of scale, you have to kind of push outside of New Zealand pretty quick, because you're not going to be able to attract a lot of top growth capital into your business if your horizon is only domestic. You've got to be able to show kind of how you're going to get into these massive markets with huge kind of total addressable market sizes, in order to kind of really build something on the world stage.
Okay, got it. Do you believe in that saying that all publicity is good publicity then?
Not quite. I mean, there's some obviously bad publicity, but I think there's no company that's been disruptive on the world stage. I can't think of any, like Facebook, Amazon, Uber, Airbnb, all these companies, DoorDash. They always have a lot of polarizing PR in the entire time. So I think it's just part of the journey, and I think on the whole, media is really good for you to build trust with your customers and build awareness for your brand and scale your message to more people. And so on net, it's definitely an important tool that the entrepreneur has to use in their arsenal. But you have to be ready for the bites as well as the joys of it as well.
Okay, great. Next question is around COVID. Obviously, you can't be here tonight because of COVID. So how has COVID impacted Crimson, both in terms of sort of entering new markets or scaling as a company? And how has having everyone, or maybe majority of your team working from home, impact the culture that you've built within the company?
It's a great question. So on the whole, COVID's been a great secular tailwind for online education businesses. It's obviously really challenging in general, and not good to be around. I'll kind of walk through the different parts of our business. So we have some after-school tutoring centres like Numberworks, and some of those businesses, they can't really operate during COVID lockdown with physical tuition. They've got to move online. So in the short term, that was frustrating financially, but on the positive, I guess, it drove a lot of digital innovation in that business that was probably hard to get done prior to COVID because it was quite used to doing things the way it had been done for a while. So now, I guess, Numberworks has been able to really develop quite a compelling online offering, which has really seen it go from strength to strength in recent months. So I think that would be sort of the most challenged part of the business. And then our other major units, which is about 85% of revenue, have I guess really benefited from the focus on remote education. So our online high school, for example, gives families the ability to have a seamless world-class education from anywhere, irrespective of what's going on with local lockdowns or anything. So I think this remote learning, remote work trend, is a bit of a tailwind to that in particular. As people sort of see what it's like to do more remote learning, even part-time, which is what most of our learners do with Crimson. The other kind of part of our business is online university admissions counselling, helping students getting into these top universities. And so I guess we're really used to working online for the whole service provision. So during COVID, lockdown or not, it doesn't affect our service delivery, but it can be quite disruptive for some of our competitors who are primarily brick and mortar in the geographies where they still exist. So I think COVID we've been able to manage quite well. One thing that has been useful for our business is we used to lots of physical events, and during COVID we were able to see those transition to webinars and other kind of digital marketing channels, which created a stronger kind of LTV cap, or I guess financial acquisition profile for kind of bringing on board students. So I think we've been able to improve our digital marketing channels throughout COVID quite a bit. But as far as culture, Crimson's always been funny in that we've always been pretty distributed, because even from the early days, to your first question, I think, I was in the US, China was in New Zealand, Fungjo was in Australia. In fact, I hadn't even met my co-founder in person for 18 months before I met him in person for the first time after working with him, Fungjo. So we've always been very distributed, we're very comfortable with that, and I think even prior to COVID, we had lots of things in place like company all hands, Slack channels, and a lot of distributed work anyway. So we haven't really been so affected culturally by COVID, I think. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. So you've recently been valued at $458 million US and have raised a further US 8 mil. How was that experience, and what kind of challenges did you face doing that?
Yeah, I think these days capital raising is not so difficult, because basically the way the growth profile of business works is in the early days, you're convincing people to back you in your seed round when you have a limited business, it's unproven, probably it requires a lot of cash investment to get it right, and you may not have any track record behind you as an entrepreneur. It could be your first company. So in the seed round, or in, for example, the A round, you're really trying to convince people to see the world the way you do, as far as the opportunity in front of you. And so in those early days, I guess the value is more debatable. As you grow, your valuation is purely a function of your financial metrics and potentially your innovation pipeline and how much you're going to grow in the future. So these days, when we tap sort of equity capital markets to raise money, it's pretty quick, because financial investors can evaluate the status of Crimson, growth opportunities, and then sort of invest accordingly. And there is quite a promising tailwind in our industry. So I think we have historically been lucky at Crimson in that we got probably in a good position in the seed round with those investors who took quite an interest in us, and then we've been able to kind of really execute quickly on the world stage, and then have been able to go on to raise capital to continue to support that growth. But I would say the best advice around capital raising is you want to build a good business that doesn't require capital raising, because capital raising is a tool used to amplify a good business to go faster and give you kind of competitive advantage as you enter more regions, launch more products. But you don't want to build a business that relies on capital to function. So many businesses were built before this phenomenon of venture capital even existed. And so as a founder, I always encourage folks I mentor and stuff to act like they have a very limited balance sheet, and not build something where capital raising is this sort of life or death requirement.
That's really great advice. You also have some pretty high-profile advisors on board. How important are your advisors, and how do you go about attracting the right ones?
They've been really important for us. I'm 26 now, and we've got more than 400 staff around the world in 20 countries. So we are woefully inexperienced for the challenge of leadership that we have to do every day. So my co-founders and I have always really leaned in heavily on external advisors across all areas of the business, from scaling up the business to education curriculum, to like technology and innovation. So basically, part of probably our strength is that along the way we've been able to continue to bring on board, an increasing array of leading advisors. So in New Zealand, folks like John Key makes headlines, but we also have like people that led international growth for Uber, or Larry Summers, who used to be the president of Harvard. We just did a fireside chat from the CTO of Uber, former CTO of Uber this week at Crimson. So these types of advisors, help us do a couple of things. Number one, they help us to avoid the big mistakes they made in their own experience building these things. Number two, they bring to us this kind of industry perspective that we can't really have just through our lens. And then thirdly, they can make things like valuable intros, either for like business, investors, clients, etc., and kind of continue to push us along. So I think bringing on board advisory board members is similar to raising capital or generally growing a business. It's a bit of a snowball where you've got to start with people that really believe in you and trust you, and then build that reputation and continue to grow. So our first advisors were folks like Janine Manning or our investor Julie Robertson, and then they were able to kind of see execution, see our results, then open up doors for the next phase of folks to join us. So that's kind of how I describe it. But I would say it's very hard to build a world-class business without heavy-duty advisors, particularly if you want to compete outside of New Zealand in these foreign markets where competitors can be pretty intense. So I think I'm a big advocate of using advisors, and we definitely have done that a lot at Crimson.
That's really insightful. Now let's move on to the future of Crimson. What does growth look like for you going forward, and what are some of your next big goals that you're looking to achieve?
Yeah, great question. So within our core business, which is helping high schoolers getting into the world's best universities, Crimson is the market leader in most of our geographies. There's some other big ones we've got to get to that first position in, but across the board, we still have a lot of room to run in that. So, for example, in America, there's a huge audience of kids applying to the US, same as in places like China, Korea, etc. And we're still very early days in the growth opportunities ahead in that market. It's kind of hard to understand sitting in New Zealand because we don't have that many kids applying to the US and UK. But across the world, this is like a huge cultural phenomenon and focus for many families, particularly across Asia. And as a result, that continues to be sort of a key anchor to our growth and development. We've been able to sort of reinforce that growth through enterprise partnerships with big school groups around the world, adapting our technology to serve large volumes of students in one go rather than just one-on-one delivery, etc. So we see a lot of growth ahead for that college admissions business. But more generally, we see that as kind of the anchor to a whole funnel of adjacent businesses. So college admissions lets us work with the world's smartest young minds, getting into the world's best universities, and the most challenging admissions processes around. And that kind of infrastructure, both the technology, the curriculum, the content, the sales and marketing associated with it, has been able to give us a lot of powerful core competencies. That's let us jump into, for example, online high schooling, which is a huge growth area for us. Basically, I think if you speak to most people about their high school experience, they might have some good friends out of it, but very few people would say that, they thought high school was super effective. Most people, found many of their classes boring, the teachers variable in quality, and they often didn't get, particularly strong career advice, and it could just be, radically improved, and, hopefully we can. So the aim of the game behind, CGA is take many of the learnings and insights that have powered our core college admissions business to really reinvent the high school for the digital age that we're in now today. And that will be both part-time, where kids will be at a physical school and they'll use CGA or Crimson Global Academy to take extra classes outside of school, extracurriculars and things on the weekends, or they'll go full-time online, which we have many learners around the world who use us as their exclusive high school provider. So we see that as a big growth opportunity because there's a lot of kids in high school right now who could have a faster learning experience. It's more personalized to them, and so that's a big new growth vertical. And we're also looking at other units like our careers unit, helping young professionals, as well as early learning units, which is why we've made some acquisitions that we've done over the last couple of years. So I guess the future is very much in online blended education delivery, where we're helping kind of create digital solutions for some of the challenges that have emerged from the physical school system and some of its limitations.
So with these goals in mind, does this mean that you are needing to expand your team? And if so, what type of people are you going to be looking for to bring on board to scale further?
Yeah, so we're hiring basically like almost every department at the moment. Particularly in New Zealand, we need to hire a lot of engineers, some data science folks, product managers, to continue to level up our CGA offering for the online high school. We continue to be on the hunt for talented educators, top teachers to join our school, as well as I guess business development folks that can help grow Crimson's presence in more markets. So Crimson's basically hiring across almost every unit that we have. And I guess some of the key things that we're really pumped about for our folks to join us is just a strong passion for education, a real belief that education can be done radically better, and a desire to kind of see that through. And then also, I guess, a will to win. Crimson's a competitive organisation, and we like our staff to really be pushing, to make sure that they are thriving in our environment. Crimson is thriving as well. And then also the last thing we look at is this thing called our level up attitude, which is students or staff members that are always keen to further their own education, both formally or informally, and prepare for the next growth challenge of Crimson, the next growth challenge in their own career ambitions. And so that mindset of continuous personal growth is quite a classic, critical one amongst our high performers at Crimson. So there are a couple of traits that I think generally define some of our best performing people in our environment and who we look to hire.
Okay, fantastic. So one last question from me before I hand you over to the audience for Q&A. If you had just one piece of advice for anyone in the room tonight who may be interested in starting their own company or scaling what they're doing already, what would that one piece of advice be?
Sure, my one piece of advice would be focus on a hyper niche. So Peter Thiel talks about the idea of choosing a small niche market and dominating that first. When I say niche, I mean super niche. So our niche was 50 kids in Auckland that weren't getting the support they needed from high school. You've got to start with a small targeted segment and really prove that you can deliver value to them, and then use that to expand. You can expand geographically, you can expand to new products. But a lot of entrepreneurs start with quite a broad vision, and the amount of capital required, the amount of time required to execute on a big vision. It's taken Amazon 30 years to build what they've built. So you really need to make sure that you initially focus on a very tractable problem in a niche market which you can dominate, and then from there you can bring that to folks like investors, prospective staff, and then use that proof as evidence as to why you deserve the right to kind of get to the next phase of growth. So I would always advise focusing on a hyper niche problem to start with, and however niche you think your segment is, get even more niche and dominate that first, and that would be my key piece of advice.
Okay, fantastic, really useful. So do we have any questions from the audience?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, awesome. Hey, Jamie, that was awesome. I have a question about, I guess, the trend that, well, I'm not actually sure if it's a real trend, but there seems to be this sort of popular notion that the idea of universities are dying out, and people are taking on these massive student loans in order to get degrees and knowledge that they can otherwise get online, etc. Do you see this as any kind of a tangible threat to what you do, or is that something that you're responding to, or is it just sort of like this, I guess, a popular meme?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think that probably 80% of the universities in the world today, probably won't exist for the foreseeable future, right? As things keep going. So I'll kind of give you a sense of how we see this. There are many universities right now that only survive because they're like local monopolies, or there are very few local choices. Before online learning, people would typically just go to the university closest to where they go to school, and often these universities don't have particular core competencies in really anything. They just sort of exist and have just been available to those local students. Now, with online university degrees, for example, now top programs like University of Pennsylvania and Ivy League school can be taken from anywhere for master's programs. Same with other programs like Johns Hopkins. That provides a real competitive risk to low quality kind of local university programs. So I think that the vast majority of universities don't add value, and the graduates leave and they can't really get higher salaries because of their education. So a good example in Auckland is law schools within New Zealand. So there's an oversaturation of lawyers coming out of Vic and Auckland and stuff. many of them are on salaries less than what you earn working in retail, for example, in Sydney, when they first graduate. Now, some go on to do great things, but on the whole, a lot of these university degrees are not adding clear enough value to their graduates. Now, if you kind of zone in on the schools we send kids to, these are usually defined by a couple of traits. First of all, they have an acceptance rate below usually 30%. Secondly, they tend to have very strong career outcomes for their graduates. So Crimson alumni today are working at places like Goldman Sachs, McKinsey, they're Rhodes Scholars, they've launched their own companies. They're working for places like Tesla on really competitive salaries. And we send kids to these institutions because they have this demonstrated track record of delivering great results to graduates. And as a result, for the last 15 years, every year, the number of applicants to these schools gets higher and higher, and the acceptance rate gets lower and lower, and they become more and more sought after. So I think in the future, the world's best universities will dominate because they'll be able to do online and in-person delivery, and then this long tail of kind of uncompetitive programs will be disrupted, or at least the prices for these degrees will have to come way down. So things like boot camps, things that let you rapidly acquire industry-ready skills will be very disruptive to the big majority of schools. And as we build our online high school, we're not really preparing for a world where universities are the only place you go post your degree, but kind of like a full spectrum of pathways from folks who just want to enter the job market straight away, all the way to those who want to go from Kazakhstan to Harvard.
Fantastic. Anyone else? Yeah.
Hey Jamie, you're quite academic. You've done a lot of studying, a lot of papers. What's your secret? What's your strategy? How do you do it all?
You mean like, how do I do all the academics?
How do you take in all this knowledge and study and understand it with all the problems that you solve on a day-to-day basis as well?
Oh, it's a great question. I guess, Probably when I was pretty young, I guess, my mum was pretty gung-ho on the fundamentals, so I did a lot of math and English and built really good foundations in those subjects. And then when I got to, say, Harvard, for example, I had quite good math and English, and so I was able to skip a lot of coursework and take more advanced courses and kind of get through that degree pretty quickly. Same when I went to business school, at Stanford. I was on the younger side of my class, but I had, good fundamentals in finance and math, debating and English and stuff, so I could get through the degree pretty quickly. So I think probably I just went hardcore in my studies quite early in life, and then I've been sort of riding the tailwinds of that for many years now. And now at this point, I honestly just do these degrees for fun because it's kind of like a way to keep my mind stretched and challenged. And I think when you're building a company, it requires relentless focus, and so I can either, if I have like sporadic ideas, it can distract my team. So these degrees are a way of kind of, sort of keeping my sort of busy thoughts away from the need to focus the troops. So I guess that gives you a bit of a sense, but I would say it's a bit of a sort of nerdy passion of mine.
Brilliant. Okay. Yeah, over there.
I've just got a question about your marketing strategy, because the people who are paying for it are the parents, whereas the people who are consuming it are the kids. So how do you sort of balance that, and where do you target, and how do you get the parents across the line because they're paying for it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So this varies culturally. So I'll tell you a funny story. So when we do an event in Auckland, say the room's got 100 people, there'll usually be 70 students, 20 mums and 10 dads. If you do the same event in Korea, the audience is 99 mums and 1 dad who's been dragged along by a mum. So the demographics around the world and who makes the choice varies a lot. In some of the Western countries, particularly in say like Caucasian, family backgrounds, etc., the student might be the one driving this decision. But for example, let's say within China, a lot of the time, we might not even meet the student until the second meeting or something, because the parents will be the ones thinking about these education pathways. So we do have to localize how we reach out to families in each geography, but ultimately it has to be a combined decision of both the student and the parent, because the student's doing the work, and the parent, I guess, is funding, their program with us. So I guess as far as who hears first from us, we've got lots of content that students find, we've got lots of, content parents find, and so we tend to kind of eventually bring them both in. But as far as the exact focus, it varies based on each market. So in New Zealand, it's more like student-centric, but in, say, Korea, it's more like mum-centric.
Okay, great. Other questions?
Thanks, Jamie. It's really amazing to hear your inspiring story and how you built it up into the stage. I just have a question related to education for the people, because I think a lot of time, I'm from Asian background, my mom and my dad would ask me, okay, so what do you mean you would want to go to, or what job would you want to do? No one really asked me a question what kind of lifestyle I want to have, or what kind of impact or purpose in my life that I want to have. So when you teach these kids, like more targeted to like, okay, how can I get you to these schools, or do you ask them about what kind of their life you want to live, or what is the purpose of doing this, or how it's going to lead you to in the end?
Yeah, it's a great question. So basically, we've seen at this point more than 300 kids to Ivy League schools and thousands to these top universities. And what I can say, seeing these kids, thriving, is that every single kid that gets to these top schools, all these Ivy League kids, they all have strong intrinsic motivation. So the process by which you push a kid for many years, like you can sort of push a child up to the age of 13 or something, but once they get into high school and they have more autonomy, it just doesn't work that well. So basically, a critical part of our process is helping them find genuine passions, genuine interests. And why school's so boring for so many people is that there's not much exposure to kind of like what you can do post-school, and so it's hard for most kids to connect the dots between what they're learning in school and how it's going to help them, 5 years later. And so what we aim to do at Crimson is both exposing them to many different career pathways. They can find what channels are most interesting, as well as what university pathways are most interesting, and then how those things are going to enable their kind of personal vision for change in the future. So whether or not they want to be a social activist, or they want to be a investment banker in New York, connecting the dots for them to kind of unlock their intrinsic motivation is critical, because you can't push the kid for very long unless they want to be there. It's very, very difficult. So we spend a lot of time with kids helping them find their purpose. And actually, when they apply to these US schools in particular, they've got to write these application essays, which are very creative in nature, and they really draw out a lot of your self-awareness. So, for example, I had to write about this challenging family drama that I went through that I'd never put on paper before. And I wrote about my first part-time job at Portos in Mission Bay, and sort of the humbling experience that was that I burnt burgers and sort of got told off by my boss, even though at school I was doing pretty well. So, the process in which we prepare the kids for these US schools, it has to drive out intrinsic motivation, and it has to drive out kind of genuine passion and purpose and self-awareness. And probably part of our success recipe is doing that consistently across a wide variety of different families. So that kind of gives you a sense, but that's quite critical to the DNA of Crimson's programs.
Fantastic. Any questions? Yeah, one more. Oh, thank you.
Hi Jamie, thanks for the talk so far. And I guess it kind of follows on from doing a lot of cold emails, but then the question goes into when you were expanding globally, and you've obviously done that extremely successfully and rapidly. Was that something where either you and that core group of founders were going on the ground to build those teams out, and you just got there, you didn't really know who you're going to approach or to start? Or were you out there sort of researching, being like, who on paper is the best person I can try and find here, and sort of more take that cold email to them and then in there?
Got it. And just your questions in the context of international expansion, is that right?
Yes, so when you're moving into different countries and need to grow that team.
Okay, cool. So I think when you approach international expansion, there's a bit of art and a bit of science. So first of all, the science. So in our case, we identified a bunch of factors that we thought would make like a good Crimson market. And we ran that analysis across I guess most of the major markets, and that gave us a bit of a prioritization list, what markets and what we wanted to enter into. Some of that's kind of a bit obvious, but there is some dynamics to be aware of. So, for example, take us. In America, there's a lot of college admissions, revenue to be earned. However, it's also competitive. So when I first started, we were 18, a bunch of Kiwis. Why on earth would some American hire us in New Zealand to get them into college? It's kind of crazy. So we actively decided to not go into these really competitive markets until we built up our product and credibility and scale. And then later, when we had a very formidable offering into those markets. So we did our market scan. We found markets that were good markets, but also we could quickly do well in. And then as far as how we sourced our country managers, the year following graduating from college, I basically was on a different country for 2 to 3 weeks with Chandra, and opening up these geographies, meeting country managers, doing in-market interviews, hiring them, working with the team on their first event. We then created a growth operations team led by Kevin and Hugo, who's in the room today, I think. And they then took that to the next level with a lot more of these, at a much faster pace once we did the first couple in places like Singapore. Now, as far as how you find the country manager, I think looking at a resume that's only good for like finding candidates, but you've got to put them to the interview, because a lot of what it takes, if you drop someone in a new market, it's just going to be the entrepreneur acumen. I was told I can't use this word, but the hustle. And basically, you know, when you drop them in the market, you need to choose somebody who, you know, is going to be have the willpower to kind of crank this out. So I'll give you a funny example, a more random one. So when I was at Yale NUS, which is a school in Singapore, I was catching up with this crimson with a student I knew from high school, and I said, hey, do you have any students you'd recommend who, you know, might be good hires for Crimson? And he turned around and he looked in the cafeteria, and there was this tall-looking fellow who looked American, and he said, hey, that guy's winning all the entrepreneurship competitions. He's a computer scientist, you should talk to him. So I spoke to him, and he was like fluent in Russian, fluent in English, half American, half Russian. He was 19 at the time. And we got talking, and then, you know, I think 2 weeks later, he was on a gap year in Russia, and that was, you know, this guy called Andrew Wooten. Now today, that guy, he's 24, and he manages like more than 30 million of revenue across, you know, like 10 different markets. And, you know, he's been responsible for a huge amount of our rapid international growth. So I found him in a cafeteria through a referral, and he just happened to be this unbelievably skilled guy who's just learnt at every stage really rapidly how to do this. So if I just looked at his resume, I'd never hire like a 19-year-old, you know, dude with no experience outside of, you know, Singapore, barely out of high school. But you know, we took some punts on folks like this that really paid off quite big. So I think you want to have a bit of a framework for who you think you should hire. But in my case, a lot of our older experienced hires in the early years that weren't good fits with the culture, and you know, we didn't really get those right. So it was often some of these younger folks who we could really resonate with that, you know, got the ball moving for us. So I guess in summary, a bit of science, you want your framework, you want to think about competitive dynamics, and then when you find people, you can't just get like enamored with resume, you have to really take them through like a, you know, case study interview process, and then, you know, probably spend some time boots on the ground with them. So that would be kind of how we did this. COVID obviously spiced things up a little bit, but on the flip side, you know, markets are more open to like online marketing. But yeah, that's kind of a bit of the inside source about international growth.
Great answer. Okay, I think we've got one more from the front here.
Oh, hey Jamie, it's Hugo. I don't know why I've never asked you this before, but taking, I guess, revenue out of the equation and, I guess, pure unit economics, what defines success for you?
Well, success for me is very simple at Crimson. Basically, it's, you know, building the high school that I would like to have my own child in. So I think about, you know, bringing kids into the world and the sort of schooling environment I'd want for them. And I really want to build, you know, that infrastructure for them. So, you know, when they pop into the world at some stage, they can have a lot of fun going through school and avoid lots of the challenges. I think more generally, it's, you know, impacting the lives of millions of students with a, you know, really powerful education experience. It sets them up to have kind of a career and life of impact. You know, I think there are a few things in life that, you know, can really jettison you to the next level as education can. And so for me, it's about really doing what we do, but at a huge volume of students. So I think about that scaled impact, and that's kind of what I think motivates the team. A lot of our team, you know, are very passionate students that, you know, loved academics in their own right, or really didn't like it and wanted to change it for the better. So I think we all have that kind of desire to do something quite unique on the world stage of education.
Cool, thank you. I think that's probably all we've got time for right now, but Jay's going to stick around virtually. If anyone else has got any other questions, just hang out. So before we finish up tonight, I just want to thank everyone for coming. Thanks to our sponsors, Amazon, Cultivate and Talent Army. And I think there's a little bit more pizza, a few more drinks if anyone is still hungry. And don't forget to sign up to our next event, which is on the 19th of August with Mahesh, who's going to be talking about how to build a unicorn. Can I just get one quick round of applause for Jamie before he